They called him Bran the Broken, a name whispered with pride at first, a name that meant survival, wisdom, and neutrality. But time, as it always does, twisted meanings. Names became symbols, and Bran's name slowly became a warning. Not because of cruelty nor because of war, but because of what he did to memory itself. No one knew when it started. At first, people simply forgot small things. A banner lost to time, a battle misremembered, a name that used to echo in mead halls, suddenly gone from every tongue. Maesters blamed the chaos of the war, the burning of libraries, the fall of old castles. They said it was natural. History had always been fragile, but then it got worse. The tale of Rhaegar and Lyanna vanished from every scroll. Gilly cried when she realized she couldn't remember what Sam had once told her about Jon's true parentage. In fact, Jon Snow wasn't even mentioned in the new chronicles of the Great War, just a northern bastard turned knight who vanished in the snow. No lineage, no throne, no legacy. Arya forgot the faces she'd worn. Sansa couldn't recall the color of her mother's eyes. Tyrion remembered drinking with Jaime in the Blackwater Rush. But he couldn't recall what their father had done to Tysha. That memory was gone, scrubbed clean, like it never happened. And Bran, he never said a word. He just sat, staring, watching. The throne room changed under his rule. No Iron Throne, melted by Drogon, yes. But now it was something else entirely. Cold, empty, no symbols, no heraldry. Just Bran, in that wheeled chair of carved weirwood, eyes sometimes white, sometimes grey, often hollow. It wasn't just memory fading. It was being taken. The Citadel grew suspicious. Maester Ibros tried to compile the history of the Long Night again. But each morning the ink was smeared. Pages missing. Candles melted down to wax stumps they swore were never lit. Some whispered the books erased themselves. Others whispered Bran had become more than a king. A few brave souls tried to confront him. Davos Seaworth was one of the last. The Onion Knight had no taste for magic, but he had fought for truth. He traveled from White Harbor to King's Landing, beard grey, eyes tired. He knelt before Bran and said, "Your Grace, people forget too much these days. Even gods must honor memory." Bran blinked, slowly, as if he was waking from a dream. "There is no need for memory," he said softly. "Memory births vengeance. History births division. I have seen what comes when men worship the past." Davos didn't understand. "But we are who we remember." "No," Bran whispered. "You are who I allow you to be." And then Davos was gone. Not dead, just gone. No one remembered him. Not even Gendry, who once toasted with him by firelight. Not even Brienne, who had ridden beside him on the frost-bitten fields of the dead. His name was erased from records. His ship never existed. His smuggling days? Forgotten, and still Bran sat, quiet, watching the realm forget. Samwell Tarly, Archmaester now, tried to resist. He wrote day and night, copying memories, hiding books, burying scrolls under false floors. But even his own mind began to betray him. He'd wake up screaming, clutching his head, unable to remember the names of his brothers at the wall, ghosts in his own life. He went mad trying to hold on to things that no longer wished to be held. One morning, he vanished. His room was neat. Quills dried, books stacked, but his journal was blank, pages white as snow. Westeros moved on, not forward, just on. Without memory, there was no guilt, no shame, no justice. Houses no longer feuded. Oaths were shallow. Bloodlines didn't matter anymore. And in that silence, Bran ruled, not as a tyrant, not with fire or sword, but with silence, with forgetting. No songs were sung. Bards played melodies, but they had no words. Weddings had no family trees. Children were named without ancestors. And when they asked, who came before us? The answer was always the same. No one important, but in the crypts of Winterfell something stirred. A shadow behind the statue of Lyanna Stark. A memory that refused to be erased. A whisper, barely audible, that said, he doesn't get to choose who we are. Somewhere in the far north, Jon Snow felt a cold wind on his neck. He didn't know why he looked over his shoulder. Didn't know the name Bran anymore, but something inside him whispered, remember, Jon didn't sleep much anymore. The winds beyond the wall howled louder than they used to, and the trees whispered things in tongues he couldn't place. The free folk said the land had grown uneasy. They blamed ghosts or old gods waking. But Jon, he didn't believe in ghosts. Not exactly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been taken from him. Not a sword, not a friend. Something deeper. He barely remembered Castle Black now. The faces of his brothers blurred in his mind like snow in a storm. Sometimes, when he tried hard enough, he saw Sam, just a flash. A chubby face behind a book, a nervous voice. But then it slipped away, like trying to hold smoke. Even Ghost, once his constant shadow, now felt distant. The direwolf never left his side, but there was something in its eyes, like it was waiting for him to wake up. Wake up from what? One night, under a sky full of stars, Jon wandered out from the camp alone. He walked past the sleeping tents, past the fire pits and watchmen. The snow crunched under his boots. Ghost followed at a distance. Something was pulling him, something he didn't understand. He reached a hill of stones, a place the free folk called the Old Watcher's Rise. They said the land remembered things there. That sometimes, if you listened long enough, it would speak. Jon sat in the silence for what felt like hours. Then it came, a whisper on the wind. A name, Bran. He flinched. It was a small sound, just a breath. But it cut through him like ice water. He didn't know why it mattered. He didn't know who Bran was. But the name lit something in his chest. A spark in a frozen hearth. He said it aloud. Bran. Ghost let out a low growl behind him. That night, Jon dreamed. In his dream, he was in the godswood of Winterfell. The weirwood tree bled red tears as it always had, but its face was twisted in pain. Crows circled overhead, cawing like mad things. And in front of the tree sat a boy in a wooden chair, eyes milky white, skin pale as death. Jon stepped closer. "Who are you?" he asked. The boy blinked. His eyes turned dark, like a stormy sea. "You knew me once," the boy said. "But I took that from you." Jon felt the ground tremble. The trees around him groaned. "Why?" he asked. "Because truth is a weapon," the boy replied. "And Westeros needed peace. You took our past. I saved your future." The boy reached out a hand. "Come back to me. Forget this dream. Forget this name." Jon stepped back. No, the boy's face didn't change, but his voice did. It turned cold, hollow. "You will remember, and you will suffer for it." Jon woke with a gasp, snow clinging to his beard. The wind had died. The hill was silent. But the name echoed in his mind now, clear, sharp, undeniable. Bran. He said it again, like testing an old blade, and this time he remembered the face. The boy he'd grown up with. The fall from the tower, the blank stares, the strange powers. The king who never wanted to rule. Jon sat in the snow as everything came flooding back. Sam, Arya, Sansa, the long night, Daenerys, her ashes, his betrayal, the dragon, the chains, the vote, the crown, the silence that followed. His fists clenched. Why would he do this? Jon whispered to himself. Ghost pressed his snout against Jon's shoulder, whining softly. "I need answers," Jon said. The next morning, he told Tormund he was heading south. Tormund frowned, scratched at his beard. "What the fuck for?" "There's something wrong," Jon said. "Something no one sees," Tormund shrugged. "The south never brought you anything but pain." Jon nodded. "Then I guess I'll feel right at home." He rode alone, past the wall that now stood cracked and hollow. South, toward forgotten lands and broken names. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew something now. Bran didn't just erase history. He buried it alive, and Jon Snow had just started digging. The north looked nothing like he remembered. Not that it had changed much. Stone still stood where it always had, and the sky still wore that endless grey. But Jon realized with every step that the loss wasn't in the land. It was in him. He passed through small villages that once might have called out his name, offered bread or ale or wary glances. Now there were only blank stares, cautious nods, and a silence that felt unnatural, not cold but hollow. Like everyone had forgotten how to ask questions, or worse, had been taught not to. In White Harbor he found it again, that eerie absence. The guards at the gate didn't recognize him, didn't even know his name. When he asked about Lady Stark, the response was a blink and a pause. "Sansa." "Never heard that name, sir." He didn't argue. He just moved on. The city was quiet. No songs from taverns, no children playing in alleys, no sailors boasting in the docks. Everything functioned. Ships came and went, bread was baked, coin exchanged, but there was no life to it. Like a painting someone forgot to finish. He found an inn near the southern edge of the harbor, run by an old woman with shaking hands and cloudy eyes. She didn't speak much, just gave him a key and a nod. That night, he dreamt again, but this dream was different, sharper, louder. He stood on a battlefield littered with bones. No banners, no flags, just corpses frozen mid-scream. The sky was black, not night, just void. He walked, and with every step names returned to him. Your Mormont, Ygritte, Gren, Pip, Hodor. They echoed like thunder, and then Bran was there again, but this time he wasn't a boy. He was tall, taller than Jon remembered. Robes of grey and white flowed around him like wind itself obeyed his steps. His eyes were glowing now, not warging white, but something else. "Something wrong. You're remembering too fast," Bran said. "You'll break. Maybe I want to break." Bran tilted his head. "That's not what I showed you. That's not what you are." Jon clenched his fists. "You don't get to choose that. You were never a god." "No," Bran said calmly. "I was something worse." Jon lunged forward, drew a sword that wasn't there. The dream cracked apart like glass. He woke up sweating. The inn smelled of mold and dust. The candle beside his bed had burned to a stub, and on the table across from him, someone was sitting in the dark, a woman. She wore a black cloak pulled low over her face, but he could see her mouth curled into a dry smile. "Took you long enough," she said. He didn't move. "Who are you?" She leaned forward just enough that he saw her eyes. Grey, cold, familiar. "A girl has no name," she whispered. Jon's breath caught. "Arya?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. You remember me?" "Of course I do," she said. "Bran tried to take that from me, but I was trained to be no one. You can't erase what doesn't exist." Jon stood slowly, heart pounding. "How many of us are left?" "Not many," Arya said. "Most don't even know they've forgotten. They live in a lie and call it peace. And you? What have you been doing?" "Following the cracks," she said. "Looking for others. There's a few, scattered, confused, but they know something's wrong. They feel it." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were 4 items: a coin, a torn piece of parchment, a shard of black glass, and an old direwolf sigil, worn, nearly faded. "Proof," she said. "Not just of the past, of him. What he's done." Jon stared at the items. Every part of him screamed that they were real, true, but something in his head buzzed like a warning. As if Bran was watching through the cracks. "What does he want?" Jon asked. Arya's smile faded. "Obedience, silence, a world without revenge, without passion, without memory." "Peace," Jon muttered. "No," she said sharply. "Control." There was a knock at the inn door, loud, slow, rhythmic. Arya's hand went to her blade. "We need to go. Who is it?" "Not who," she whispered. "What?" The door splintered inward with a single blow. A man stood in the threshold, except it wasn't a man. Not fully. His eyes glowed faintly blue, his skin too pale, his voice monotone. "Return to your rooms. Curfew is in effect." Arya drew her blade. Bran's new sentinels. Dead flesh filled with silence. Jon grabbed his sword. This wasn't peace, this was war. A war for memory itself. They ran, out the window, across wet rooftops, through alleys too narrow for horses or those half-dead sentinels Bran had unleashed on the realm. Arya moved like smoke, silent, fast, without hesitation. Jon followed, sword in hand, his breath burning in his lungs. Behind them the creature moved like a shadow in pursuit. Not fast, but relentless. Its steps didn't echo. Its eyes never blinked. It didn't speak again. It didn't need to. Just the sight of it was enough to freeze the blood of anyone who remembered the White Walkers. But this thing wasn't one of the old others. It was worse. It was familiar. When Jon glanced back through the misty streets, he saw its face for a moment, blurry, wrong. But somehow, he knew it, or had known it once. Maybe a guard from the wall, maybe someone who died fighting beside him. Whoever it was, the name was gone, stripped away, leaving behind only obedience. Where are we going? Jon gasped as Arya led him into a crumbling sewer entrance behind an old wine shop. Somewhere Bran doesn't watch, she whispered. They slid down into the dark. Wet tunnels, lit only by a flickering torch Arya had hidden in a dry crevice. The air reeked of mildew and rot, but Jon didn't care. Down here, the silence wasn't watching. Arya crouched beside a rusted grate and pulled out a scrap of map inked with shaking hands. She lit a second torch and showed him the paths, many of them marked with little red circles. These are safe houses, she said. Or they were. There aren't many left now. The sentinels have started finding them. How do they track us? Not us, Arya said. The memories we carry. It's like we bleed them. And Bran, he smells it. The more you remember, the louder your mind gets. Jon sat down, wiping grime from his blade. Then we don't stand a chance unless we find the source. He looked up. Bran, she nodded. He's not just erasing the past, Jon. He's rewriting it, piece by piece. The Citadel is lost. Old Town is gone. No one even remembers Valyria anymore. Magic, bloodlines, prophecy, it's all being scrubbed clean. Jon leaned his head back against the stone wall. His heart still raced, but deeper than that was a rising rage. I followed him, Jon whispered. I chose to leave, and thought it was the price for peace. Arya sat beside him, not looking at him. So did we all. They were quiet a long time. Finally, Jon broke the silence. You said there were others. Who? Two I trust, Arya said. Tyrion is one. He never forgot. Jon blinked. He's alive? A drunk, a fugitive, and likely insane, she said with a faint smile. But yes, and the other? Arya hesitated. Then she whispered, Nymeria. Jon's eyes widened. The wolf. She's not just a wolf anymore, Arya said. She remembered everything. And she changed. She's becoming something. Maybe it's the old magic. Maybe she's tied to the weirwoods like Bran is. I don't know. But she knows what Bran did. Jon stared at the flame. Then we go to her. Arya stood nodding, but before she could speak again, the ground above them trembled. Not a knock, not a footstep. A pulse, it ran through the stone, through their bones. Jon gripped his sword tighter. He found us? No, Arya said. He's showing us something. A flash struck the darkness. Not real light, but something that lit the mind. Jon saw it, a memory, but not his a tree. A weirwood in flames, screaming faces melting in the bark. Bran standing beneath it, arms outstretched, his eyes a flood of stars. A voice filled Jon's head, not Bran's voice, but older, colder, the one that had once spoken through the roots of the world. He was never meant to sit the throne. He was meant to replace it. Then it was gone. Jon staggered to his feet. What the hell was that? Arya's face was pale, her breath sharp. The old guards, she said, or what's left of them. They're trying to stop him. No, she said, her voice hollow. They're warning us. He's gone too far. Even they can't reach him now. Jon looked at her. Then who can? She met his eyes. You, his breath caught. No, he said. I don't even know what I am anymore. You're the last piece he couldn't erase, Arya said. The last memory too deep to pull. You carry blood that can't be rewritten. You were death and life. Fire and ice. You were reborn. And Bran doesn't understand what he couldn't control. Jon shook his head. That's not a reason. Arya stepped close. Then here's one. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a single black feather, old, broken, burnt at the tip. Jon stared. From the wall, she said. From Maester Aemon's raven. One of the last things saved before it all burned. You remember his words? Jon closed his eyes. He did. Kill the boy and let the man be born. When he opened them, he didn't speak. He just nodded. Man be born. When he opened them, he didn't speak. He just nodded. They traveled by night. Arya knew the roads, or what was left of them. She avoided the trade routes, kept off the king's roads, and cut through marshes and broken forests where the dead trees watched but didn't speak. Jon followed her silently, Ghost at his side. Eyes glowing like pale lanterns in the dark. The world was falling apart in ways most people couldn't even see. They passed villages where people moved like sleepwalkers, eyes dull, voices flat, repeating the same phrases to each other over and over. All is well. The realm is united. We serve the King of Peace. Arya didn't stop to explain. She just kept moving, and Jon didn't ask. He knew madness when he saw it, but this wasn't madness. It was programming. The Sentinels weren't just patrolling anymore. They were teaching, whispering things in the ears of the people, rewriting their memories slowly, like rot from the inside. They found a farmhouse in the Reach, where a family had nailed shut every window and covered their walls with charcoal drawings. Hundreds of them, faces, names, old symbols, direwolves, dragons, ravens. A child had drawn them all. She was the only one who could still speak in full sentences. My brother doesn't know who I am anymore, she told Arya. He calls me number 4. My mother stopped saying my name 2 days ago. I write everything down so I don't forget. Bran's men came once, took my father. He smiled when they did. He thought they were angels. Arya gave her a knife and a name, Mira. Run north, Arya said. Look for a woman with silver in her hair and a scar down her cheek. Tell her Arya sent you. The girl didn't cry. She just nodded and vanished into the trees. Jon stared at the wall of drawings. There were words too. Dozens of them scratched into the wood. Winterfell, Snow, Needle, Rhaegar, Tower, Truth. He touched one of them, and for a moment, he remembered his mother's voice. He didn't even know her name. Why didn't he just kill us? He asked. Arya stood behind him, arms crossed. Because it's easier to erase than to destroy. Death is final, memory that can be rewritten, bent, twisted. And if we forget what we were, we never become anything again. Is that what he wants? Arya didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, I think Bran wants peace, but not peace like you or I understand. Not peace built on truth or justice. He wants stillness, a world with no war, no passion, no ambition. And to do that, he has to kill the past. Jon turned to her. So we kill a king? No, Arya said. We kill a god. That night, the dreams came harder. Jon saw Bran again, but now he sat on a throne not made of swords or stone, but of roots. Twisted, blackened roots that stretched across the land, into people's minds, into the books, the trees, the songs. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but Jon could hear the voice in his own mind. You're breaking the cycle. You were supposed to be forgotten. Let go, Jon. Let go. He woke with his hands clenched into fists and blood running from his nose. Arya was already awake. We're close, she said. Another day's ride. To where? She looked east, toward a jagged ridge of hills covered in ancient stone and overgrown vines. To the cave where the last children of the forest lived. The place where Bran first became the three-eyed raven. Jon swallowed. You think he's still tied to it? I think it's where he broke. Her voice was quiet. And if we're going to undo what he did, we have to go back to where it started. They reached it by nightfall. The entrance had caved in decades ago, but Arya knew where to dig. They worked in silence, clearing rock and dust until they found a narrow passage still intact. It stank of wet roots and ash. Jon stepped in first, torch in hand, Ghost right behind him. The walls were covered in old carvings, now cracked and half gone. Symbols of men and monsters, stars and eyes. Arya paused by one that showed a man being split in half by a tree. They were never gods, she whispered. Just manipulators, like Bran. Worse, she said. But he became one of them. Then he became more. They reached the heart of the cave. It was cold, unnaturally so. In the center stood a weirwood tree, unlike any Jon had ever seen. It had no face, no mouth, no eyes. Just twisting bark, smooth and white like bone. The roots coiled around something buried deep in the ground. Arya pulled a dagger from her belt. Valyrian steel, small but wicked. You sure this will do anything? Jon asked. No, she said. But it's all we have. Jon stepped forward, staring at the tree. Then a voice spoke, not from the air, but from inside them both. You shouldn't have come here. Arya's torch blew out. Ghost growled low, and the weirwood tree began to bleed. The blood that oozed from the weirwood tree wasn't red. It was black, thick, slow, and steaming in the cold air. It dripped from the bark like tar, each drop hitting the stone, with a sound too loud, too heavy. Jon stepped back instinctively, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. Arya stood motionless beside him, her eyes locked on the bleeding tree, her face pale and unreadable. Ghost growled again, low and uncertain, his body tense but unwilling to retreat. The whole cave began to hum, a low vibration that filled their bones and set their teeth on edge. It wasn't the sound of magic, it was the sound of something wrong. Then the roots moved, not a tremble, not a shift. They moved like the arms of something waking from a long sleep. They slithered across the floor in slow, jerking motions, wet with black sap, reaching not toward them, but around them, encircling the space like a trap closing. Arya raised her blade. Jon lit a second torch and held it out, but the flame flickered violently, struggling to survive. A voice came again, this time from everywhere at once. Not Bran's voice anymore, deeper, ancient, but with the weight of him inside it. You think memory is freedom. You think pain gives you truth, but pain only repeats itself. Again and again. You wanted to break the wheel. I broke the world instead. Jon stepped forward, lifting the torch higher. You took everything, Bran. You took names. You took love. You took the cost of things. No one even remembers what we bled for anymore. A low rumble answered him, laughter maybe, or something like it. The tree pulsed again, and from the shadows behind it something began to form. It wasn't a man, but it wore a man's shape. A body of roots and bark and shadow, eyes glowing with that same unnatural white, skin pale as frost. The figure stepped from the tree as if born of it, arms stretched like branches reaching for the sun. It looked like Bran, but it wasn't. It was what he had become. Arya moved to Jon's side, her blade ready. Is that even him? Jon stared at the thing before them. It's what's left. The figure didn't blink. It didn't breathe. Its voice came not from its mouth, but from the cave itself. You mourn the past because you are still bound to it. I gave the world peace. I gave it silence. You gave it nothing, Arya snapped. You stole their lives. You made them empty. The figure tilted its head slightly as if curious. And yet you came here carrying knives and fire. Just like before. Just like always. You are the cycle I ended. Jon stepped closer. Then end me. For a moment there was stillness. Then the figure raised a hand. Roots burst from the ground, writhing toward them. Jon swung his sword and sliced through one, but two more followed. Arya leapt back, ducked, rolled, and drove her dagger into the base of another as it lashed toward her. Ghost lunged at a thick vine-like tendril, tearing it with his fangs, but the tree didn't stop bleeding. If anything, it bled more. Jon locked eyes with the figure. You were my brother. The figure didn't flinch. You were a weapon. You always were. Jon's breath caught. He felt something burn behind his eyes, something buried deep, trying to claw its way to the surface. A memory, no. A command. He dropped his torch. It fizzled out as it hit the wet stone. I trusted you, he said quietly. I let them crown you. And so the world was healed, the voice said. A price paid, a name forgotten. Let it stay that way. Arya shouted his name. He didn't hear it. He was already charging. He slammed into the figure with everything he had. Not a clean strike, not a warrior's move, just rage. His blade bit into the creature's side, carving through bark and root, but it didn't fall. It didn't even react. Instead, the figure turned its head toward him slowly, almost with sorrow. You shouldn't remember, Jon gritted his teeth. And you shouldn't exist. Behind him, Arya lunged, driving her Valyrian steel dagger straight into the back of the figure's neck. There was a crack, not wood, not stone, something older, something unnatural. The entire cave screamed. The roots flailed, the blood turned to mist, and the walls trembled. The figure staggered. For the first time, it showed pain. Arya twisted the dagger deeper. You're not a god, Bran. You're a lie. The weirwood tree behind them cracked down the middle. A blast of wind knocked them both back. Jon hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision blurred. Arya slammed against the wall with a grunt, her blade slipping from her hand. Ghost yelped and vanished into the shadows. Jon dragged himself to his knees. The figure still stood, but its form was splitting. The roots were pulling away, the body unraveling. Inside, there was a light, white and cold, like 1,000 memories trying to escape. Jon forced himself to his feet, and then he remembered everything. Daenerys, the wall, the long night, the sword in her heart, the tears, the roar of Drogon, the look in Bran's eyes when they asked who should rule. He remembered who he was, and more importantly, who he had been. He stepped forward, and the last of the old gods screamed his name. He stepped forward, and the last of the old gods screamed his name. The scream tore through the cave like lightning cracking open the sky. It wasn't just sound, it was memory, unleashed and angry. Jon staggered under the weight of it, every part of him screaming to let go. Images crashed through his mind. His mother's face, Ned's voice, Robb's laughter, the cold steel of Longclaw, the warmth of Ygritte's skin, the dragonfire behind Daenerys' eyes, the snow falling on her corpse. He couldn't breathe, but he didn't fall. He stood, jaw clenched, sword gripped tight in both hands as the light inside the unraveling creature pulsed faster, brighter. The thing that had once been Bran, once been his brother, was splitting at the seams. Roots writhed like snakes trying to hold the form together, but it was too late. Arya's dagger still glowed with an eerie shimmer where it was lodged in its spine, veins of light cracking out from the wound, like lightning across a winter sky. Arya crawled to her feet, clutching her side where the wall had slammed her. Blood soaked through her tunic, but she didn't care. She looked at Jon, and for a moment she smiled, not a smirk, not the mask she wore in Braavos, but something real, familiar. "You remember," she whispered. "I remember everything," Jon said, and his voice was fire. The figure lifted its head, light leaking from the cracks in its skull. "Then you remember why I did this," it said. Its voice was weaker now, distant, layered like echoes across time. "The world you fought for, burned. The people you saved, corrupted. Your queen went mad. Your lords lied. Your gods died. I gave them peace. I gave them silence. You gave them nothing," Jon snapped. "You buried their names. You turned the living into statues. You let them sleep so you could rule." "I didn't want to rule," the thing whispered. "I wanted to forget." Jon stepped forward. The weirwood roots around him hissed but didn't attack. Maybe they knew. Maybe even they were tired of the lie. "You saw everything," he said, his voice trembling not with fear, but with fury. "You saw all the pain, all the war, and instead of helping us carry it, you decided to erase it. That doesn't make you wise. It makes you coward." The light inside the figure flared violently, and for a moment it looked like Bran again. Just Bran. Pale, fragile, eyes too old for his face. "Then end it." Jon raised his sword. Arya reached for her dagger, but before either of them could move, the roots recoiled, pulling back into the walls. The cave began to collapse. The ancient tree, once the heart of the forest, the blood of the old gods, splintered down the center and erupted in white flame. The figure let out one last, inhuman cry as it was pulled apart. Light, shadow, root, bark, until there was nothing left but ashes. Then silence. Real silence. Not the kind Bran created. Not the still, empty absence of memory. This was the silence that comes after truth, after pain. The kind of silence that means something. Jon dropped to his knees. He was shaking. He didn't know why he was crying, but the tears came anyway. Maybe for Bran, maybe for the years lost. Maybe for the people who would never remember what they'd once been. Arya limped over to him and sat beside him in the ashes. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, her breathing ragged. "Did it work?" she asked. He didn't answer, but then the cave changed. On the walls, the carvings began to glow faintly. Names appeared, carved in languages Jon couldn't read, but somehow understood. Faces shimmered in the stone. Not clear, not full memories, but fragments. Like the world was breathing again. Like it was remembering. "Look," Arya whispered. Above them, a star-shaped crack opened in the cave ceiling. Moonlight poured in, real light, not the false gleam of Bran's illusions. It bathed the weirwood ashes in silver. Ghost padded into the chamber, ears perked, tail low, eyes cautious but calm. He stepped toward Jon and pressed his snout to his shoulder. Jon looked up. The roots were gone. So was the voice, and in their place, echoes, whispers that didn't feel forced, didn't feel planted, just memories. Raw and old and returning, Arya stood, shaky but firm. If Bran's gone, the spell should break. Jon nodded slowly. People will start to remember. Not all at once, she said. But enough. Jon looked around at the tree, now reduced to ash, at the carvings that pulsed softly like beating hearts. Then it's not over. Not yet, Arya smiled. No, now it begins. Outside the cave, the wind shifted. The skies, once pale and grey for so long, began to clear. Jon stepped into the open air, and for the first time in what felt like years, he saw stars, real ones, unedited, uncontrolled, alive, and in the south, far away, a raven circled above the red keep. And in its beak, it carried a scroll long forbidden to be written. History had begun again. They didn't ride back as saviors. No songs followed them. No armies rallied in their name. Jon and Arya traveled like ghosts through a waking realm, slow, quiet, half-forgotten, and the land itself felt different now. Like it was stirring from a deep, dreamless sleep. The road was no longer silent. In every village they passed, people were remembering. Not all of them, not fully, but the cracks were growing. A boy in the Riverlands asked about the white wolf who walked like a man. A woman in the Vale swore she'd once seen a queen with silver hair atop a dragon, though no one believed her. A sellsword from Lys described in haunting detail the burning of King's Landing, though he insisted it was just a dream he kept having. Pieces, whispers. Jon watched it spread like wildfire, but this fire didn't destroy. It restored. In Gulltown, they found Tyrion, or rather what was left of him. He'd been hiding in the cellars of a ruined tavern, hair long, face haggard, reeking of wine and dust and loneliness. When Jon walked in, Tyrion blinked 3 times before whispering, "Either I'm dead, or you're real," Arya smiled. "Unfortunately, both of us are real," Tyrion cried when he remembered everything. It took hours. The weight of it was unbearable. He clutched his head, sobbed into his hands, screamed Daenerys' name into the stone walls, cursed Bran for 100 crimes, and finally collapsed in silence. When he rose, he looked 10 years older, but his eyes were clear. "You broke the spell," he said. "The puppet king is dead." "No," Jon said softly. "He wasn't a puppet. He was just lost." Tyrion poured himself a drink with a shaking hand. "We all were. They didn't stay long. The sentinels had begun to rot, collapsing where they stood, black blood leaking from their mouths. But in some places, the people tried to hold on to the silence. They liked not remembering, liked not hurting. They called the truth poison. Called Jon and Arya liars, Tyrion a drunk. "Some people," Arya said, "don't want the truth." "Doesn't matter," Jon replied. "They'll get it anyway." By the time they reached Winterfell, word had already spread. The North remembered first. The old stones were stubborn. The weirwoods deep in the forest groaned back to life. Ravens began to speak in old tongues again. And when Jon stepped through the gates of the castle, the guards fell silent, not in fear, but recognition. He walked through the courtyard he once bled in, through the halls where he learned to fight. Ghost trotted ahead of him, tail high, nose twitching at every corner. Sansa was waiting for him in the Godswood. She remembered everything. She stood beneath the old weirwood tree, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them, she didn't speak. She just walked forward and embraced him. No words, no need. They stood there for a long time, brother and sister, bound by blood and fire and memory. That night, the fires in Winterfell burned brighter than they had in years. No celebration, just quiet light. And around those fires, the people began to tell stories, real ones, of the dead that rose, of queens who burned cities, of bastards who were kings, of wolves and dragons and gods that failed. Stories they'd almost lost, Tyrion wrote again. Arya left the next morning, heading west. "There are still blank places in the world," she said, Now that memory matters again, I want to see what's out there. Sansa remained in the north, rebuilding, teaching the children the names of their ancestors, telling them about a girl who once stabbed the Night King, about a boy who flew with ravens and forgot himself, and a brother who killed a queen to save the world and paid for it with silence. And Jon, he didn't take the throne, didn't want it. He stayed in the north past the wall with the free folk. He built no kingdom, waged no wars. But the old gods whispered to him still. Not commands, not visions, just stories. The kind only the land remembered. And when people asked who he was, he would smile softly and say, "No one important." But they knew, they always knew, because in the end, Bran didn't erase everything, he couldn't, the world remembers. Bran didn't erase everything, he couldn't, the world remembers.